Hi y'all, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Alyssa and this is a part of the internet where we talk about knitting. So let me get it pulled up here. A couple weeks ago, a while ago, I asked you all for your unpopular knitting opinions, and okay, I just got on Instagram and I have to show you all. Okay, Mesa Skeins just dropped sneak peeks of her summer collection. Like, look at that. Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, back to the point of the video. I promise that wasn't planned. Oh, also, if you came over here because Macy told you about my channel on her live, thank you for coming. I so appreciate you being here. So let me get into where I have this saved. I asked for y'all's unpopular knitting opinions, and I want to talk about them, and I don't just want to react to them individually. I kind of want to talk more broadly about what makes a knitting opinion unpopular, and kind of some themes I saw throughout people's responses. So let me scroll back. I have to shut off the air conditioner to be able to do this. Who wants to shut off the air conditioner? Ooh. So if you do hear any background noise that sounds like AC humming, I can turn off my air unit, but I cannot make my neighbors turn off theirs. So if you hear the hum of an AC unit, it's not mine, but I tried. Let's start with, okay, so I got one, and I have heard this is a long and ongoing debate in our community. So and I'm not going to out anybody for their opinions that they sent. These are all anonymous. But somebody said hand-dyed yarn isn't worth it compared to a good pick from the big box craft store. I am a lover of indie dyed yarn. The project I have closest to me right now is indie dyed yarn. I started this video by showing you a post from one of my favorite indie dyers. So clearly, to me, I disagree with this opinion. But I wanted to dive deeper into like what it's actually saying, instead of it just being like my surface level reaction that the answer to that is like, well, no, you're wrong. I love indie dyed yarn. So the person said it isn't worth it compared to a good pick from the big box craft store. So I, as your friendly local LYS employee, want to talk to you a little bit about fiber choice in terms of this opinion. So I will say that your typical indie dyed superwash merino, with varying amounts of nylon in it, is not suitable for every project. It's just not. Sometimes, if you're making, I don't know, a baby blanket for your cousin's coworker who you don't know if they're gonna take care of it. Anytime anybody comes into the shop and they ask me, hey, I want to make a baby blanket, what do you recommend? I do not take them over to the big beautiful wall of Texas local indie dyed yarn. That's just not what I do. I ask, are you comfortable with machine washable wool, or do you want all synthetic? And then we go from there. And so I understand that indie dyed yarn is not appropriate for all scenarios. Now, do I absolutely love using it when it is appropriate in a garment like this? I'll show off because I've made some progress on it since last time y'all saw it. This is the, we got a tangle. This is the Cottage Core Crop by Mezzo Makes, and it's getting through the body of it. Many more inches to go because there's a big ruffle. But this is, I don't think I have the ball band in here, but I'll hold up the yarn. This is Summer Sage. It's one of Stunning Strings colorways. I got it during the yarn crawl, and it's gorgeous. Like, this is not a color you find everywhere. This like beautiful, soft, muted, like it looks like somebody's vintage dinnerware. Like, this is not something that's just easy, if it's not trending, to go get off the shelf, and it's making a lovely garment, and I'm enjoying every little bit of knitting this. However, I want to talk about a couple things. It is the term worth it And I've seen, I'm not accusing this person of saying this, but I want to have a larger discussion here. So that's all my like why I love indie dyed yarn or why you shouldn't maybe pick it for a project. Is it suitable for what you're making in terms of like your color needs or your fiber needs or whatever. But it's that term worth it that bothers me. And the reason why is because I know an indie dyer on like a friend level, and it's hard work to run your own business. I don't know if people understand. Maybe they see some of these bigger, really established hand dyers who have warehouses and who have teams. Your average local indie dyer is doing this out of their garage with maybe the help of like a friend or a partner, and they are the creative director, the financial director, the marketing person, like they do everything. And so I think when that word worth it comes in, it's that price tag. It's that $28 to $32-ish here in the US price tag. And for some people, like that, I will say a phrase that I've heard before: just because it's out of your budget doesn't mean that it's not fairly priced. And I'm not saying, like, I don't know this person who left this comment and I don't know their life, but I have heard people say like, oh, indie dyed yarn's overpriced and it's not worth it. There is so much that comes with being the fan of an indie dyer or knitting with their yarn, going to a trunk show, meeting them personally, like showing off the project you made on Instagram, having that very personal interaction with them, putting their brand sticker on your water bottle, like meeting other people who like their yarn. Like at Juju Knits, we have such like a big fan community around Mace of Skeins that it's like there's just so much extra that comes with supporting a local business. And also, you can look into it yourself. There's plenty of economic studies that show when you buy small and when you buy locally, that money stays in your community in a way that it does not stay in your community when you shop at Joann's and Michael's. However, I understand that sometimes for budget constraints or the rate at which people make things or whatever, the price point of a Michael's or a Joann's, like I'm not knocking it. I have made, there is an Afghan sitting in my living room right now made out of Joann's yarn. I'm not knocking it. I will say that there is value, I think, in shopping local, supporting local, shopping small when you can. So if for you and your making needs, indie dyed yarn just isn't practical, I think that's maybe the word swap that I would like to see in people's discussions of yarn, is that if for you it's not practical to buy indie dyed yarn for a project, one project or multiple, that's okay. That is okay. But that doesn't mean that it's not, that price point is not worth it. I also want to add the small caveat that not all LYSs, but some, do offer a really lovely range of acrylic yarns that might offer you something that you can't find at a big box craft store, still at a reasonable cost. So there is still a way for you to shop local and shop small and still get those kinds of yarns that you love and that you want to work with. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to interrogate the word worth it there. And then to the point I made at the beginning of the video, like what makes this opinion unpopular? I think this kind of vein of comment is unpopular because it devalues people's labor, right? That's the thing that people don't like. That's what makes this, I think, an unpopular opinion, is that, I mean, we can see it right now. If you follow me on Instagram, you know I won't stop posting about the writers and the actors strike. As a former theater kid, it's something that like I feel for. I love TV and film, and I want all my favorite people to be compensated fairly. And so, you know, people's labor is worth fair compensation, and that's often hard under our economic system that we're all living in. but whether or not that's in your budget, people's labor is worth it. So that's my response to that one. I think that's what makes that opinion unpopular. Let's move on to something maybe a little less heavy. I got this twice, kind of the swatching versus not swatching. I don't swatch. Swatching is pointless. Like, should you swatch? That kind of thing. It was a reoccurring comment that I got, so we'll make that number 2. I am a proponent of swatching. I'm a proponent. I think if you want to make something and you don't want it to make you mad and not fit at the end, you should swatch. I'm talking specifically about garment knitting here. Now, have I ever swatched for a shawl in my entire life? No. No, I have not. If I like the fabric that I'm getting and I know that I will not run out of yarn, then we're good. But yeah, I highly recommend swatching for garment knitting. And I think what makes this unpopular is that for some people, swatching is not part of the fun of knitting for them, right? They don't, it's not an enjoyable part of the process. It's a thing keeping them from doing the fun part, which is, knitting the thing. And that's not, for me, I'm trying to find ways to enjoy the entire process of knitting, the care of swatching, of getting a sense of like, okay, this is like the fabric I'll potentially create. Gauge swatching also gives you a lot of information if you want to change the fit of a design. It's really important to know things like your row gauge. If you're going to change, depths of V-necks or armholes or things like that, that matters. So if you just don't want a horrible surprise, please swatch. But yeah, I think it's a controversial opinion because it's kind of just one of those like, oh, well, that's so boring and like responsible, but I don't want to do that thing. And I get it. It's not the most, sometimes it's not the most invigorating thing to do. But I try to make knitting like a stockinette swatch of something. I try to make that social knitting, like when I'm around people. That way it doesn't feel like, oh, this is so boring, because I can only knit on really basic, easy projects when I'm like in a knitting circle, chatting with people, or I'll mess up a lace pattern or a colorwork pattern or something and I have to rip it out. So I try to make my swatches my social knitting. That way it's just, back and forth. And then I have my swatch done. And that feels like a chore off the list. So, saying a lot because I'm actively thinking about my responses. I think that's really all I have to say about swatching versus not swatching. I firmly believe you should swatch it, asterisk, in most occasions. So there's my answer for that. This was a fun one. We'll do number 3 because somebody asked me about this the other day. So this person says it's okay to use single ply for sweaters and socks. You don't need nylon if you get gauge. Okay. No. I know that people like single ply for garments is like a hot button issue. I will link to, I cannot remember the name of her channel right now. I know that in her not knitting time, she's a professor and does this like beautiful job documenting her projects, but has a really, really great episode about why, from like a sort of, I guess, like physics of knitting perspective, you wouldn't want to knit a sweater out of single ply. And the way that I explain it to people when they ask me is that it will bias on you. So what is biasing? That's kind of when things sort of like skew, like twist at an angle on your body. So instead of your garment just laying as it should, it keeps wanting to, no matter how much you tug it, it wants to kind of do a little swivel, wants to do with this. And that is because the issue with single ply is that it's one ply that's been twisted on itself. It hasn't been, I don't know how good my camera is, if I can explain plies to everybody on this episode. Where's the tail of this project? Okay, we're gonna get real up close and personal with the camera here. Is this gonna focus? I don't think my camera's that good at focus. If I split this little end of my yarn, let me just fray this a little bit. Okay, I frayed it a little bit. You can see that there's multiple strands of yarn that were twisted together to make this that I'm knitting with. A singles is only one of these. That's what a singles is. And so because if you're a spinner, you kind of know all these terms. But when you put twist into something, you're putting energy into it. And that energy gets balanced out when you take that single strand and ply it with another single strand, and then they do a this, they become friends. Singles have never had that friend. They've never had, so if you've ever knit with your singles, and I'll just make this yarn do this because it's not gonna wanna do it, but it starts to do kind of a weird, in your bag, it starts to do a this situation, like it keeps wanting to do that, twist on itself, like in the yarn that's hanging down. That's because there's this energy that wants to balance itself. It wants something to twist around. So when you go and you knit a whole, say like a basic t-shirt style, out of a single, it's going, I guess unless the designer has taken specific steps to keep that from happening, it will have a tendency to potentially want to bias, because there's just all this unaccounted for, unbalanced twist in it that then will be reflected in the garment. So that's one reason I tell people, maybe don't knit your entire whole sweater out of singles. The other issue that really bothers people and makes people really sad is pilling. So something like this is like a 4-ply fingering weight yarn. I will eventually one day get pilling in my high friction areas, but it'll be moderate to light pilling that I'll be able to take a glean or two, or like a sweater comb or something, and clean off. People get horrified with the amount of pilling that occurs just everywhere on a singles sweater, because singles are not, the lack of tight twist in them, that lofty, fluffy, cloud-like texture we love for our shawls, opens it up to be vulnerable to friction. And as something else rubs against it, it pulls those fluffy, lofty fibers up into those little nubs that we know as pilling. Because I think it leads the opinion that is a, I think if you're gonna knit a sweater out of singles, that is not something to be approached lightly, and that's not an opinion I would just like spew out to knitters without any sort of caveat about the dangers of it. I highly disagree about singles for socks. So the comment said that you don't need nylon in socks, and that is true. You can look online, there's a couple of really awesome brands that don't put nylon in their sock yarn. But do you want to know what those brands have? They are like 6-ply, highly twisted. Most of the time, they're not merino. They're pretty toothy wool. And so they can hold up to what? Friction. Because you wear your socks in your shoes, in your boots, around your house. And constant friction. And every pair of socks I've had has had like pilling, matting, felting, even if they're super wash inside of the sock, in where your foot is rubbing all the time. And so I have heard stories from people who've knit a sock out of singles, and it essentially has gotten holes and disintegrated on them. So I agree that you don't need nylon to knit a sock. There are superwash, I do know a brand that makes a superwash merino sock yarn with no nylon, but it is really got this defined, twisted texture. And then the other brands that I can think of that use a more sheepy wool or some sort of natural alternative to nylon, they're pretty highly plied, pretty intense twist. especially when, you know, they make a pretty dense, durable fabric when knit at a tight gauge. So yes to nylon-free socks. Those are something that I am in the process of experimenting with. I casted on a sock out of some nylon-free sock yarn I was gifted, but I cast it on the wrong number of stitches and I don't like how it's fitting, so I'm gonna rip it out and start over. The things that I would say that singles are good for include shawls. I have a hat made out of singles that I really love. Small accessories, things like that. I would even say you could get away with using a singles as color work up here in a larger overall garment, like in a yoke, because this isn't gonna get the friction that areas like this and like where your purse rubs or where you sit down in a chair and your sweater rubs against the chair, like those areas are gonna get. So that's my opinion about singles and when you shouldn't use them. I'd highly dissuade, I 1000% dissuade you against using them in socks. No, absolutely not. I would discourage you heavily about embarking on a garment made of singles. That said, like when I said small projects, I am about to make a Carol bralette by Elizabeth Margaret, and that you can use singles, but it's small, it's got all these short rows, it's highly structured, there's an elastic band in it, it's not a drapey overall garment. So that's my opinion about single ply. And what I think makes that an unpopular opinion is that people haven't liked the results that they've gotten, and knitting is a lot of time and often money, especially if that singles was indie dyed. And so people just don't want to see all their hard work turn into like a big pilly mess. That's not fun. So one of my friends posted twisted rib is totally worth the effort. I know some people hate twisted rib. I love a twisted rib. I love a twisted rib on the cuff of a sock. It's one of my favorite places to use it. It just gives it gives a look that I often enjoy in my knitting. So yes, I think it's unpopular, especially when you're doing twisted knit flat. Purling through the back loop is a really weird motion. I just now, I think I did my first project where I had to purl through the back loop maybe like last year, and just now this year, I feel more comfortable with that motion because I did a project recently where you had to do it all the time, but it is a very funky motion if you're doing twisted rib flat. It's a pain. But I like a half twisted rib. So once you get used to the motions of it, it's gorgeous. So I agree, worth the effort. Let's see, who do we have next? Well, I get why people alternate variegated skeins. I'm not a fan of it. This is one of those, depends what you're making, also play at your own risk kind of things. I don't alternate variegated skeins at all points of a project. I wish I had it to show you. I'm currently knitting a bottom up, like little Borello type cardigan thing. And for the entire like body part, I did not alternate skeins, but I got into the sleeves and I was using a highly variegated yarn that I just think that skein B had a little bit more blue in it than skein A, and I wanted to make sure that didn't cause some weird issues later in the garment when I ran out of that skein and I was on skein C, the other sleeve, and so I am alternating. This is one of those things that I highly encourage people do it. I talk about, I think if you don't like, sometimes if you're doing a garment, the weird laddering, the puckering you can get up the side if you're just twisting them every row. Like skein A and skein B as you're going up. I really recommend helical knitting. I think it brings a lot of joy back into alternating skeins. I can't explain it and you can't think about it too hard, but it's essentially like you're doing kind of two spirals at the same time with your yarn, and I recommend that. So I don't knock anybody who says like, I personally don't enjoy doing this, so I don't do it, but I have my reasons why I advise people to alternate skeins. And sometimes it's like a project by project decision if you want to or need to. Especially, I would always 1000% tell you to do it if you got your skeins from 2 different dye lots, because oof, there is nothing more painful than that skein turned out a little bit different than the other one. Woohoo, no. All right, our final opinion is one that I think is fun, and I will just leave us off on. Is this person said that something they've heard is that knitting is for old ladies. Knitting is for everybody. Knitting is for you, no matter your age, your gender, whatever. It's for everyone. If you want to pick up 2 sticks and some yarn and you want to start doing the knit stitch, absolutely. I do have people who are shocked when I tell them, who don't know me in any sort of crafty world context, and they meet me and I tell them that I knit, and they don't know me that well. They haven't really gotten a sense that my personality is mostly hobbies that you can do sitting inside. They're often like, oh, but you're so young, you knit? There is this perception, I think, amongst the general public that knitting is not for the young, and it's, if you've been on knitting Instagram lately, it absolutely is. So that one is an unpopular opinion out in the world that we knitters, just as a whole, say, as me and a friend say to each other, ew, that's gross, ew. So thank you all so much for coming and hanging out with me today. This was really fun to just sit down and film something chatty. The summer's been really busy, and so I don't feel like I've made progress enough on anything to really want to show you where I'm at on different projects, but hopefully as we wrap up the summer, I will have something to show you. I do want to post a little bit of a vlog maybe. I have a very special knitting related event coming up next week that's going to have some glorious outfits, hopefully my own. And right now it's iffy, but I know some of my friends are going to have absolutely wonderful outfits for this thing we're all doing. So teaser, come back and watch that. That'll be fun if you like pink and a certain film that is all the hype right now. And that is where I will leave you. I hope you are staying safe wherever you are in the world. If air quality is terrible where you are, if the heat wave is terrible where you are, please just stay safe in ways that you can, and make sure those that you care about in your community are safe too. So, all right, take care, and I will see you all next time. Bye.